On this video, we will analyze Frostpunk audio details and how it unified as a mesmerizing soundscape by using Karen Collins' framework to categorize and analyze sonic elements in video games. But first, let's give you some story and context for those who don't know the game. Frostpunk is a Polish game made by 11-bit Studios in 2018. In Frostpunk, the player will be playing as the captain. Their mission is to do what is necessary to make the city survive throughout a global cooling event called the Great Frost. The game will progress through time, and when time passes, the temperature will keep dropping. As the captain, the player must plan how to manage resources such as coal, wood, steel, food, and people to keep the people's hopes high and lower their discontent. Nowadays, we can see many similarities between video games and film soundtracks. To analyze the game's sound elements, the academics have adopted the film diegetic and non-diegetic binary concept. However, in film, everything that is represented on the silver screen is linear and non-interactable. Everything will play out as the same order whenever you watch the film. But in video games, the sound is interactable, meaning that the sound output can vary depending on the player interaction. Thanks to Karen Collins, who theorized the framework for ludomyosology to categorize the different sound elements in video games. The most basic audio elements are the non-dynamic diegetic and non-dynamic non-diegetic. This type of audio can be heard in cutscenes where the player can interact, and it also can be heard in the gameplay, such as the dialogue that NPC keeps talking in the loop and repeating music that did not interact with any parameter. The next is diegetic adaptive and non-diegetic adaptive. The difference here is the adaptive feature, which means the audio can change when some parameters are triggered, such as the morning sound of the birds tweeting or the change in music when the time is running out and the beats play faster. Finally, diegetic interactive and non-diegetic interactive. These are the type of sound that the player can interact with, such as gunshot when the player presses the button, the user interface sound, or the music when the player starts the fight and the battle theme is triggered. And now, after we have a basic understanding of the type of sound in video games, let us dive into the sonic world of Frostpunk. When the games begin, the first sound that we hear is the wind blowing through the crevice where the generator is located. In Frostpunk, the wind is diegetic interactive sound. The player can perceive the wind from a different perspective when they move the game camera. On the surface, this might be just a plain ambient sound, but there is more into that. In 2006, Steve Gutte, Radius 360 co-founder, stated that ambient sound are a key part of a game overall feel. This may include music or ambient dialogue, or it may include the outdoor environmental sounds, creating a mood of safety, of excitement, and so on. And the psychological impact of an ambient sound can add much to the on-screen imagery, though not physically present in the scenery. Fear, anticipation, and anxiety are easily evoked by the careful placement of an ambient sound. With this in mind, we know that the power of an ambient sound can psychologically impact a player. Let us dive further and explore the concept and the characterization of wind that usually tie in with something terrible and wicked, like how it is represented in Frostpunk. In Theogony, Hesiod described Typhoeus, a devious god of wind, as terrible, outrageous, and lawless. In Frostpunk, wind or temperature is the player's greatest enemy. But beyond the concept of the wind that stands against the idea of good, its sound also affects the person in real life. In the book Our Sonic Environment and the Soundscape, The Tuning of the World, written by R. Murray Schafer, mentioned an interesting unpublished paper by Dr. Philip Dickinson. He mentions the case of an elderly woman who tried to commit suicide, and the reason was due to a low throbbing noise. So, the noise consultant was brought in to record and analyze the noise. The analysis found that the prominent frequency was between 30 to 40 Hz. The low frequency noise was audible to the sufferers mainly at night, especially on cold winter mornings, in a slight breeze, and in conditions of temperature inversion. In relation to this, there is also a review from an applied science journal on low-frequency noise and its effect on human health between 2016 to 2019, which shows that exposure to low-frequency noise can affect sleep disorders, discomfort, sensitivity to and irritability from noise, annoyance, hearing loss, and cardiovascular disease. In Frostpunk, as seen in the spectrometer, we can observe that the most prominent frequency is between 1 to 100 Hz. This can lead to believe that the winds that we constantly hear from the start to finish impact the player psychologically. Moreover, these impacts create tension during the game session, especially in city building and simulation games, where the player has to be exposed to sound for a long time. As the captain of the New London, the players are responsible for arranging shelter. Each building that the player builds will have an explicit sonic characteristic from interior to exterior. For instance, factories, temple, cookhouse, wall drills, coal chambers, and shelter buildings such as tents. As you can hear, tents are sonically represented as temporary and fragile shelter. The sound of wind blowing through the tents is subconsciously gives the player information about the building tier. After player upgrades the shelter, the wind sound and the flapping tarp is gone, only left with the comfortable room tone with the blurry shadow in the house. This function can be plainly categorized as diegetic interactive sound. Frostpunk has a day and night system, which means that when the workers or engineers are off duty, the sound of the people working in the building will dynamically disappear as they are going home, and the sound of their shelters will become more lively. This shows that even if we try to categorize the sound elements in video games, we can only do it roughly, because in an interactive world, any elements can traverse to any layers in the game, and there are infinite possibilities. The city cannot be called city if it doesn't have its people. The citizen of New London also plays a part in the soundscape of Frostpunk. When we started the game, we began with only 80 people, but as the city grew, we adopted more refugees. The sound of the people became denser. This adds more depth to the game, and also makes the city feel more lively when we can notice the growth of our people through the sound of the game. Generally, when we play a city building game, we are put into the perspective of a god who can do anything with a city. However, in Frostpunk, the game explicitly tells the player that they are the captain of New London, and the game will be over if the player fails their city and their people. Nevertheless, during the actual gameplay, we did not see ourselves as an avatar, except when the game is over and we are being executed or banished. But the game used the audio mechanics to make us think of ourselves as a captain. From what I introduced earlier, that some of the buildings have more than one audio perspective. This feature fits really well with the concept of the player as the captain. Every time that the player interacts with any building, it makes them feel like they are the captain patrolling the city and entering the building as they heard the reverberant sound of the interior. And this can also interactively adjust it. When the player and assign everybody from the building, the sound of the people working will fade away. And this too adds the immersive quality to the game. However, there are other perspectives that the game gives us. So far, all of the sound that we mentioned are within the diegesis, but when playing a video game, the player cannot deny facing the user interface, which can push the player away from the immersive experience when they see a lot of buttons and choices. So, the game developers come up with a various approach to design the user interface to match the game aesthetics. For instance, in EA Dead Space, the user interface is within the diegesis. But in terms of sounds, how can we achieve that? Frostpunk has various user interfaces, such as technology and building interface. Most of them have similar sonic characteristics, except the loud signing interface. Let's begin with technology, building, and economy interfaces. The reason I group these pages together is because they share similarities in audio design for the user interface. The game developer approaches their user interface sound design by designing based on the material and practical components within the game world. For instance, when the player opens a technology tree page, the first sound that the player hears are the turning cock and the steam pressure release. And when the player chooses something to develop, the mechanic sound is triggered. We accept this sound as part of the game because it has been introduced from the visual and the auditory design from the beginning. So, when the player heard this sound on the user interface, it felt unified with the game world and did not push the player away from the immersion. Another aspect that gives the player feeling of continuity is even if the timer is stopped when the interface is active, the ambience still plays, the wind is still blowing, and the people are still chatting as if the player is doing everything in the real time when they actually don't. This is called semi-diegetic sound to define those scenarios where the diegetic sound blend with non-diegetic and interface sounds. A blend of diegetic sound and a non-diegesis of the game conveys the feeling of continuity and makes the non-diegesis function feels that it stays within the diegesis. I did not include the lull signing interface in the same category because it used a different presentation. Rather than overlay the gameplay interface with boxes and options, it leads player into a new interface. As we can hear, it contains more low end than the other interface, especially when the player hovers the pointer to each lull. It produces a deep bass sound, as if it resonates with the player decision and tells them that any choice they make will heavily affect the gameplay and the people of New London. After the player has signed a new lull, the game will automatically exit the interface and bring the player back to the gameplay interface with the ringing bell and the announcing dialogue said about the new lull has been signed. This gives a smooth transition effect from what ought to be a non-diegesis feature to a diegesis with sound effects. The world of Frostpunk are vastly detailed. The articulation of sounds and gameplay that I just analyzed is the only part of the Frostpunk soundscape. There are many interesting points I haven't touched on, such as sound of time and temperature, sound of order and fate, and music of Frostpunk. I hope the point that I illustrate can help you understand the depth, complication, and how the audio of Frostpunk work together to create a mesmerizing soundscape and give the player an immersive experience.